Nothing ever stays the same, and you can never go home again. These cliches always come to mind when theme park fans complain about the closing of an old attraction. It's not that I don't understand their concern. If anything, I typically share it. My approach to the problem, however, is from a slightly atypical perspective. Where most theme park fans would point to their cherished memories of an attraction and mourn their new inability to relive those memories or create new ones with loved ones, I find the question of historic preservation far more compelling. Very few people will stop going to theme parks because they close a single ride. That's part of the appeal. Even if your favorite ride or attraction closes, there are typically several more designed for guests with a similar taste. At worst, one of those is now your favorite ride in the park. Who knows, your old favorite's replacement might be even better and become your new favorite ride. The loss of one attraction is highly unlikely to ruin your day, and to be completely blunt, very few attractions, even beloved classics, close when they're popular. If you're like me, and you love Walt Disney's favorite attraction, the following questions may cause some discomfort. Let's imagine ourselves less than 50 years in the future, in the year 2064. It's the 100th anniversary of the Carousel of Progress. What's the state of the attraction? What is its experience like now? Has it been updated? Does it tell the story of electrification in the 20th century, or is it completely different, presenting life from the turn of the millennium instead of the turn of the century? If you're familiar with the Carousel of Progress, forgive me for taking a moment to lay it out for those who are new. The Carousel of Progress is a show created by Disney for the 1964 World's Fair. It evolved out of earlier ideas for attractions based around Edison and electrification to become something very interesting. The show is presented in a rotating theater with 4 scenes featuring animatronic figures. These figures, each a member of a single family, present life in 4 different periods of the 20th century, corresponding to the seasons of the year. We start in spring around the beginning of the 20th century and jump decades forward with each season, finishing with winter in the near future. Since its debut in 1964, it's been modified and updated to adjust the time frames and technology to match the modern world. But we are fast approaching a time where the original conceit of following a single nuclear family through the decades of the 20th and now 21st centuries is untenable. This brings us to the inevitable question of what should be done with the attraction. Closing it doesn't seem to be a valid option. Walt said the Carousel of Progress was his favorite attraction. It was one of the last he completely oversaw production on before dying 2 years later. It didn't even open in his theme park, Disneyland, until after his death. This is further complicated by the fact that Walt said it would never close in any of his parks. Thus, the Carousel of Progress has become inextricably bound up with the dreams and hopeful futurism of Walt Disney. Let's presume Disney, the modern company, will respect Disney, the man's, wishes, as well as avoid provoking the ire of many hardcore parks fans and keep the carousel open. At least, it seems less likely they'll close it with a parks person like Bob C. in charge. If we can't close it and replace it, what should be done with the Carousel of Progress? I want to explore 2 ideas for preserving the heritage of the attraction, keeping it open as per Walt's wishes, and hopefully keeping the angry annual pass holder mobs at bay. One we'll call the museum piece approach, the other the spiritual sequel. Let's go back to 2064. It's the 100th anniversary of Carousel of Progress. We're standing in Tomorrowland at the Magic Kingdom. To celebrate, the attraction has been relocated into a special new show building, where a backstage parking lot is today. This building is designed to look like the original show building from the 1964 World's Fair. The area around it evokes the 1960s futurism that accompanied the attraction's first home in Disneyland. Plaques and statues commemorating Disney's dedication to the future and technology line the path. Like the original version in New York, the second floor of the new show building features an exhibition space. Instead of recreating the displays from the fair, however, this one recreates the installation as it first appeared in Disneyland in 1967. The walls show Disney's plans for the upcoming Florida project, with a scale model of the experimental prototype community of tomorrow, or Epcot, at its center. The attraction itself has been retrofitted with modern technology, but all the aesthetics, scenes, and as much dialogue as possible have been reverted and are presented in their original 1964 format. This is the Carousel of Progress as museum piece. The main argument for this approach is that it preserves forever the attraction Walt loved. It gives it a special place in the parks and fulfills Walt's wishes. Of course, there are plenty of arguments against this plan. The original version was modified in the first place because it was outdated and people lost interest in the attraction. This seems only more likely with an entire century added on. Meanwhile, this solution at least removes the carousel from the theming of Tomorrowland proper and allows it to exist in its kind of own space, regardless of any theming changes the rest of the land needs to undergo. It might be impossible to make it work with the sightlines for Main Street, the path of the railroad, and the potential emergency access the current backstage lot provides. While this is my personal preference, and would be an absolute marvel, it's not the path Disney seems likely to pursue. Instead, they seem poised to follow the spiritual successor option. Let's go back to a different version of 2064 and the carousel's 100th birthday. Instead of being segmented off, the carousel still stands where it does today. Inside, the show is updated with modern animatronics and a story that begins exactly 100 years after Walt's original version. Instead of following the family through the electrification of the United States over the 20th century, we see computers doing the same over the 21st. The beginnings of dial-up are followed by the age of smartphones, then whatever lays just around the corner from today, and finally, a vision of the future from the early 2060s. This model would continue updating over the following decades in the same fashion as the original, showing the technological progress of the last century from the point of view of a single family. This version fixes both the relevancy issue and the problem of space faced by the museum piece solution, but it's not without its own problems. First, it retains only the concept of the original and none of the pieces that Walt knew. Much like the Ship of Theseus, is this version of the attraction with all the original elements replaced still the Carousel of Progress? Opinions will differ, but regardless, no one would claim it was the version that Walt knew. That alone might be enough for some to reject the new version entirely. Also, it would be a continued investment for Disney, rather than just maintaining the old attraction and retrofitting old systems with more compact modern ones. This solution requires constant updating to keep it relevant. Since it will be ever evolving, what one generation remembers as the Carousel of Progress will always differ, at least slightly, from that of the previous generation. There are other possible solutions as well. They could just remove the ride entirely. These were just two ideas for ways the attraction could continue into the future and not have to face the constant threat of being axed. The point of this exercise isn't really even to solve the issue of the carousel itself, but rather to begin an exploration on historic preservation in theme parks. Walt Disney probably didn't know what he was doing when he said Disneyland would never be finished. After his death, this became both a clarion call for the company bearing his name and for the theme park industry as a whole. No theme park is ever finished. It only evolves over time. To this day, No ride seems entirely sacred, and the question of historic preservation is one that doesn't even exist. On its face, even the suggestion seems nonsensical. Guests want to return for each visit to some familiar experiences, but also to some new ones. New attractions also draw in guests that have never visited the park before. No theme park can sustain infinite growth. At some point, you will reach a geographical boundary. Then, you have to start cutting old attractions for new ones if you want to innovate, and guests, by and large, demand innovation. The decision to cut something is usually pretty simple, just remove whatever is least popular. But what happens when your least popular ride is also your last experience still remaining from opening day? What happens when the sentimental and historic value outweigh the value of the space to operations? It seems unimaginable, right now at least, that Disney would ever remove the Haunted Mansion from either of its US locations, or from Tokyo. But with the success of Mystic Manor and Hong Kong Disneyland, and the continued progress of dark rides, how much longer can the current Omnimover versions survive? 50 years? 100? What then? At what point is an attraction's historical merit alone enough to keep it around? The Carousel of Progress has likely only been spared because of Walt's wish that it never close. The historic significance of it is obviously part of why it's still open, but it's not the whole reason. Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln is a more valid candidate for an attraction kept open solely out of historic precedence, and the value that history represents. The Hall of Presidents is similar, and likely to last for as long as Orlando is part of the United States. Aside from these two, however, no attraction seems destined to live forever. It's easy to say that the land, attractions, and everything belong to the theme park companies, so whatever they want to do is their choice regardless of what fans or the general public think. There is some validity to this, in that the companies in charge of these parks are the stewards of their own legacies. Disney clearly knows this, given the extent of their archives when it comes to concept art, plans, blueprints, etc. Even some physical pieces of rides are preserved, and often pieces that can no longer be stored are worked into new attractions as an homage. But these archives, for obvious reason, are not open to the public. The public and preservation rarely mix well, but there remains some duty to history. Students interested in a career in the industry alone would benefit greatly from easier access to how the pioneers of the industry created their attractions. Of course, theme park fans and those wishing to reminisce would also benefit from greater access to these experiences. But is it even the job of these companies to provide that? The companies that run theme parks, so far, haven't really met this demand. Disney does release some historic content through D23, exhibits, and shows, but it's selective and highly dependent on what they want to release, not what the public wants. There are wonderful history and retrospective videos out there. The internet is awash in on-ride videos, photographs, blueprints, and recreations, but it's impossible to ever experience a closed attraction without a time machine. Even if the attraction is outdated and no longer has a home in a modern theme park, there is some historical value in recording, documenting, and making available these experiences for future generations. While the internet has done an admirable job preserving all of these aspects of closed attractions, there's one thing the internet cannot do: provide physical experiences. Watching an on-ride video isn't the same as riding a ride. Between the most recent advances in virtual reality and photorealistic computer rendering, we're nearing a point where recreating these old rides in your living room is feasible, but there are still physical parts of the experience that will be lacking. It seems unlikely that we'll have advanced motion simulators available for home consumers anytime soon. That leaves companies to provide these experiences, and unless Disney or Universal are willing to license their old ride designs to a third party, it falls on them to provide that experience. I'm not saying that those companies have to do this, merely that the costs are getting lower and the demand is high enough to make it a worthwhile project to consider. It may turn out that the necessary per-guest price is too high, but the market has supported premium experiences for a while. If Disney does go through with their Star Wars hotel exclusive immersive weekend experience they've been pitching, the price tag per guest for something like this would seem cheap by comparison. I picture something like a mix of Disney Quest and a semi-permanent, updated seasonally, archives exhibit. Imagine a building on Disney properties somewhere like Disney Springs. You enter a relatively small gift shop area with a lot of brass and wood, a la many of the stores on Main Street, USA. After paying, and presuming that the place isn't too crowded, you're admitted to the museum. This space winds through different pieces of Disney company, film, TV, and parks history. Close to the back of this gallery space, in the parks section, are small, gyroscopic motion simulators. Once you take your place in line, or when you're close enough to the front, depending on the length of the queue and available tech, you're handed a 3D VR headset, a lightweight model adapted for this kind of public use, like being, not torture for glasses wearers. When you put it on, you find yourself in the queue to the Carousel of Progress at the 1964 World's Fair. Or maybe you're on Ford's Magic Skyway. How about adventure through inner space or horizons? Abstract human forms tell you where you are in the real-life queue. When you reach the front, Tron-style pixels dissolve the historic queue for a representation of the simulator, making it easier to board and safer. Once you sit down and the cast member gives the simulator the all-clear, the pixels dissolve back to the ride. In addition to the motion simulation, small effects like fans and water spritzers can simulate everything from ride effects to actual drafts from the ride's original AC system. As you arrive back in the loading-unloading area, the image again changes to represent the motion simulator. You exit the ride, hand the headset back to the cast member, and go on exploring the exhibits. Now, I don't expect we'll ever actually see anything quite like that. As appealing as it sounds, without a strong demand from general audiences for such experiences, it seems highly unlikely that Disney or any other theme park company will invest in such a scheme. And why would they, when taking the same experience and theming it to Marvel movies, Star Wars, or any other franchise would make far more money? For now, the best I can do is offer this advice. If you love an attraction, a specific area of a park, a show, shop, or restaurant, document whatever you can of it. Take pictures and video of everything for the attraction when you're in the parks. Find concept art, or even ask company archives for stuff from the attraction. Then, share it, unrestricted, wherever you can. If anyone's going to preserve these attractions at the moment, it's us, the fans. And the more we record these things now, the more there will be for others to remember, and maybe even digitally rebuild decades from now.
Once you've learned how to get online yourselves, you'll start seeing web pages everywhere. TV shows have them, schools, Disney World, Disney World, even the White House.
What's a web page? Something ducks walk on?
Ha ha, very funny.